good. Folks, this is the afternoon session, September 13th, 2017. I'd like to start by welcoming the young people who are here today from Prescott Elementary and Parkrose, and your teachers. We're delighted to have you here with us, and I know that you're part of our first item, but I just wanted to give you that acknowledgement first, that we're so happy that you could be here and be part of this important presentation. Carla, please call the roll.
Saltzman?
Here.
Udaly?
Here.
Fritz?
Here.
Fish?
Here.
Wheeler?
Here, please call the first item.
Item 1017, accept the 2017 Arts Oversight Committee Report on the Arts Education and Access Fund.
Commissioner Fish.
Thank you very much, Mayor. It's my great honor to welcome two leaders forward to the table, Craig Gibbons, the Arts Oversight Committee Chair, and Nancy Helmsworth. And they, I believe, are going to kick off the presentation and the performance. Craig, welcome, and thank you for your service.
Well, thank you. Hello, all. We are glad to see you here for this presentation. And I'm going to turn it over to Marna Stalkop from RAC, and she's going to introduce our performers today.
Thank you so much. It's a delight to be here. At the Regional Arts and Culture Council, we put students first in all of our work in arts education. So we're doing that today in this presentation, in that we're presenting to you what we like to call a story from the field. And you're going to hear it directly from students rather than through our lens. So we'd like to welcome the Prescott students up for a performance for you and their teacher, Carolyn Langston.
All right.
My name is Carolyn Langston, and I am the music specialist at Prescott
Excuse me, I'm awfully sorry,
Elementary School.
but could you speak into the microphone, otherwise the captioners
Sorry.
can't hear. Thank you.
My name is Carolyn Langston, and I am the music teacher at Prescott Elementary School in the Parkrose School District. Our very supportive principal is here with us today as well, Mr. Sam Moranto. I joined Parkrose in 2013 when the arts tax was implemented citywide. We went from having one elementary music specialist in the entire district to having one in every building. With the return of music in our schools, the change in Parkrose students is truly remarkable. Our students sing with joy, dance with gusto, and play instruments with finesse. They vibrate with enthusiasm, they resonate with excitement, and they turn sound into the most beautiful music. The effect reaches far beyond the children's musical prowess. Our academic scores are higher, attendance has improved, and our school is more connected to our community. Parkrose students love what we have to offer, and our pre-K to 12 music programs are growing exponentially. Just like many other districts in the Portland metro area, we are so grateful that the residents of Portland value the arts and pay an additional tax each year to ensure all elementary students get a well-rounded education. Thank you for your continued support of our children. The impact we are making will last a lifetime.
Thank you.
Thank you.
People find a way. Give
we have one more surprise offering for you today. I'd like to ask Henry Bolsch, has a gift of his own artwork for the mayor, and also copies for each of the commissioners. His brother Walter is here to help him. Henry was a 5th grader last year at Richmond Elementary Japanese Immersion Program, so for your offices.
Thank you.
Thank you for supporting our
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Appreciate it very much.
Thank
We'll make sure it's in a very visible public space. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, young man. Thank you very much.
It's so great.
Thanks for joining us here today.
Thank you very much, kids. Excellent. Well done. Thank you. Thank
Can
you.
we give them another round of applause,
You bet.
Mayor?
So as you're on your way out, she's busy. I just want to thank you, children, for the gift, for the card on the package too, because I know that you sold those as a fundraiser and I bought a packet, so I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Very cool. Great.
Well, that's the show. Now
John,
now
try
it's
to
us.
top that.
That's
Try to
that's a
top
hard
that.
act to follow.
Okay, well, thank you for having us here. By way of introduction, I'd like to start with just a brief review of the arts tax and what it is before we get into what our committee has been studying this year. The voters approved the tax in 2012. The purpose was to fund one teacher per 500 K through 5 students in the Portland area. The remainder of the money that was collected was to go to RAC for distribution to cultural organizations, and the administrative costs to the city were not to exceed 5% over 5 years. That's the tax in a nutshell. As part of that, the forecasted revenues were about $12.5 million a year. And the $12.5 million forecast was based on a demographic group of adults and on a compliance rate of about 85 to 89%. Well, the arts tax was passed, and the initial action was that the demographic group that was affected was reduced pursuant to law and to some other actions. So fewer people were scheduled to pay the tax. The second thing that happened was that the compliance rate was about 10 to 15% less than the anticipated compliance rate. As a result, the revenue from the tax is about $10 million a year. And the costs, because the revenues are not what they were anticipated to be, the 5% has been exceeded and the costs are at 7.7%. That's the story in a nutshell. We're going to go through some slides and talk about some of this. And our job at the committee, on the committee, is to see that the arts tax is being used the way it was anticipated to be used. And I need to introduce some committee members who are here with us. Could you all stand up, please, and introduce yourselves? Neil?
Neil DuPont.
Yes.
I'm Madeline Hine.
Madeline High. Those are 4 of our members.
Thank you.
So, has the arts tax been doing what it was supposed to do? Oh, wait, we have some Gold Star winners here. These are people who have helped the committee out in our work. Commissioner Fish, of course, Jamie Dunphy and Amira Streeter from his office. And from RAC, we have Jeff Hawthorne and Marna Stahlkop. From Portland Public Schools, Kristen Bryson, and of course, our former chair, Stan Penkin, have all helped the committee out this year.
That's me.
That's you, Nancy.
I'm going to speak to this slide. This slide, as you can see, says the school districts are maintaining their obligation to fulfill one full-time arts, or equivalent arts teacher for every 500 K-5 students. As you can see in this slide, the number has continued to improve every year since the arts tax was implemented. In the base year, there were 997 students per teacher. And in the most current year, 2016-17, it was 381 students per teacher. The AEAF funding supported 62 teachers across Multnomah County. That's 2/3 of the 92 teachers reported by all the districts. In your report, and you have the full report, you will find specific numbers for each school district. The numbers are broken down for each elementary school, but also for each middle and high school. Our committee metrics team looks over the arts staffing ratios and tracks the progress from year to year. Please know that the first fifth graders benefiting from the arts tax are now entering high school. This year, we began to look deeper at the continuity of the arts programming. We're hoping that you will review this report, but also that school districts revisit the information as to where they are and where they want to be growing in the opportunity that the AEAF provides.
Any questions so far?
Yes, just a general question, Mr. Chair. In discharging your responsibility under the arts tax and in working with the various school districts that are receiving funding, are you getting the level of cooperation in terms of responsiveness and data that you require to do your job?
Yes, we are getting the response and the data that we need based on what we have asked for.
Okay, thank you.
So that's the schools. Let's talk a little bit about the revenue division and the revenue that the tax is generating and how it's generating it. This is a chart that shows, well, let me back up. The arts tax is talked about in the year, in terms of tax year. So just like your income taxes, for your tax year 2012, you pay it in 2013. So this chart shows that for tax year 2012, by August of 2013, slightly less than $8 million had been paid. The next column is the tax year 2013, and this chart shows that by August 31st of 2014, slightly over $8 million has been paid. The point of this chart is to show you that initially, the tax is generating more revenue each year. And the issue here is voluntary compliance. More people are paying the tax sooner. That's the point of this chart, and it gets to what the revenue division is doing. This is a chart that shows, as of June 30th of this year, how much money was collected in tax for each tax year. And you can see that the high year is 2014, tax year 2014, and slightly over $10 million. 2015 and 2016 are less because there has been less time to collect the tax. The tax has kind of a long tail because everybody doesn't pay it on time. Does this make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay. So now we talk about the regional arts and culture and their responsibility to distribute the money that they receive from the tax. And this is a chart that shows how many grants have been awarded annually. And the trend line is up. RAC pulled back a little bit this year, and I believe that they were a little over-aggressive last year in the number of grants because revenues weren't what were anticipated. So they've sort of tapered off, and they want to hold the number of grants steady for a while as the tax stabilizes. So that's what RAC is doing. Okay. Now, the big issue this year that we have dealt with is the 5% expenditure cap, and you all have dealt with it too. It's been clear that the trend is that the cap is going to be exceeded. And last year, I believe you had a resolution that said to the Revenue Division to come back to you with a solution for that issue. This chart shows the administrative costs as a percent of gross revenue, and the average has been about 7.8% a year.
Mr. Gibbons,
Yes.
just would you remind us, is under the ballot measure, is the administrative cap calculated based on a 5-year average?
Yes, it is on a 5-year average. That's what the orange line is.
Okay.
So that's, what, 7.7%?
Yes.
Okay.
You will be receiving from the Revenue Division a proposal to deal with this. And the committee has considered that proposal, and we have a recommendation for you at the end of our presentation on the Revenue Division's proposal.
But to be clear, since you earlier had a slide in which you said, because of some changes the council made and because we're at 73% compliance, we're below what was originally contemplated in terms of what we were going to collect. If we were closer to the 12 million that was originally contemplated, would we be below the 5%?
You'd be smack on the 5%. Yes.
So the original model was based on assuming you collect 12 million, and that
Yes.
that was not locked in stone, but that was the goal. And so, just as by way of preview, we either have to lower our administrative costs somehow, or we have to find some way to supplement it from some source.
Yes.
Okay.
Let's look at it a little further in this next slide. We've looked at this issue in depth in the committee. The fact is that the citizens voted for a tax to support the arts. They also voted for a 5% cap. And what's turned out is that those two things for this particular type of tax are mutually exclusive. It's kind of either one or the other. If this little cycle shows what happens, if we reduce spending on enforcement and collection of the tax, then one assumes fewer taxpayers will pay. And if fewer taxpayers pay, then less tax will be collected. And if there's less tax collected, then the amount available under the 5% cap is even lower. So really, from my point of view, there are two mutually exclusive provisions in the ballot measure. And it has to do with voluntary payment of the tax. So that's the situation with the tax. Does this make sense?
I'm not sure I buy it, but it makes sense. I mean, your logic, I'm not sure I buy where you're going with this. But-
Yeah, I want to second that. I'm not going to agree to that statement, but I hear what you're saying.
Okay, understood. We're going to switch over to our Arts Tax Committee and what we will be doing this year.
So I'm going to go ahead and read this slide. The Arts Tax Committee membership is almost 100% new. All the original committee members' terms have expired. So this flow chart illustrates the workings of the arts tax and our major agenda for the year, which is to get everyone on the committee up to speed in their understanding of the mechanics and the flow of the AEAF monies. The specifics can be a little tricky as a new citizen member. Our committee terms are 2 to 3 years, so the continuity and longevity of this committee we're trying to build a system and some simple documents to facilitate the onboarding of new members. The committee is in its second or third generation, depending on how you're counting, and there is still work to do now, and we expect the work to continue to evolve. We're preparing our new members to be ready to take over and lead the next generation.
So here are our recommendations for the year's work. You will be receiving from the Revenue Division in a couple of weeks an analysis of the 5% cap and several recommendations on how to deal with it. We support the Revenue Division's recommendation as presented in, as you will be presented with in the memo. I've worked in public entities for 30 years, and it is an extremely difficult thing to say that the voters voted for this 5% cap. It needs to be examined and maybe modified. It's tough to say, but on the other hand, the way I see it, it's kind of one or the other, and I've expressed that to you. So I understand. Our second recommendation?
Second recommendation, the committee recommends that the council establish an expectation that each school district will produce a State of the Arts report documenting the impact of the arts tax funds. The purpose of this request is, number one, to provide a fuller picture of how the arts tax benefits schools. Some of the effects are, pardon me, this confuses me. Some of the effects are direct and measurable, and that is already reported, but many of the benefits are indirect or tangential. We hope to learn more about what these are. We do not know how the seed will grow. Number two, a State of the Arts report is a reflective activity that might aid each district in their internal tracking of arts and related growth in their schools. This task stimulates self-monitoring of the AEAF use and more. And number three, the State of the Arts will generate a narrative which will be information that we can all access and share to celebrate as examples of the AEAF's success. Positive PR is needed on all levels, from the individual school to the district to the city to the county.
And that's our presentation.
Are we going to hear from Thomas afterwards?
That is not planned. As I understand, it's an agenda item for a couple of weeks
Yeah.
away.
I mean, I think because you've salted the discussion,
Definitely.
because you've salted the discussion, Mayor, what I would suggest is,
Preview.
let's take a few questions, because the committee has done yeoman's work doing mind-numbingly difficult stuff in terms of tracking the dollars. They have no control as a body about the administrative expenses they are reporting to us, and we're going to have some options presented. So do you want to hear from Thomas, or do we want to first pose questions to the committee about their report?
Commissioner Fritz?
I just have a question about, we know that Park Rose, David Douglas, and Portland are all completely within the city. How are the districts where some of the children are in the city and some not, like Centennial? They get a proportion, right? Because they're
Yes,
in the
they
city.
do.
Do we know whether they are providing more arts teachers for the school district areas within Portland than there are outside, or are they matching it so that it's across their entire district?
No, they are using the proceeds within City of Portland schools. Yes.
So if in Centennial your child happens to go to one that's in the city of Portland, you would be likely to have more arts and music teachers than one that is in Gresham, for example?
Yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Gibbons, how do you and the committee monitor the school districts to ensure that these dollars create new value and are not, in effect, being used to backfill existing positions?
We have worked on that issue for 4 years. And we have a base year of 2012 that we work from, and we compare students, the teachers today with the teachers that were in effect in that base year before the tax went into effect. And that's how we compare it. So we're comparing, they do not backfill against that base year. That's as much as we know.
And the improvement is distinct from 900 students per teacher all the way down to 381. So it's a clear difference. It's not a nuanced difference by any means.
And your recommendation about a annual State of the Arts report, which I think is a very good recommendation, what form would that report take in an ideal world?
This is the art world. I personally think it should take the form that the district, that matches the district, but the objective is to give you all and the citizens evidence to show that the tax is working as it is meant to be, that it's effective. I don't know that we can prescribe the nature of the report, but we as a committee could think about that and talk about it and see if we'd like to set out some standards for the report.
Yeah.
I want to say one other thing. I think that one thing of being on the metrics committee, I realize that we look at this data that's generated from maybe the personnel office. I'm not sure exactly which office, but I think of it as in the bowels of the school. And one other thing is I think that if we could get the district to even review their own data, districts are it must be like sitting in a box with knives coming in. They are pushed and pulled so many different directions in regulations. So just to hopefully get them to look at their own data and then really think about how it plays out in their district. So I would obviously we will talk about it, but it would involve looking at some real numbers and also some narratives that describe what those things are in each school.
You know, I would strongly encourage you to put the data and the narratives as part of your template. The stories that we keep hearing about the impact of the arts tax on kids, particularly the Right Brain Initiative generates a lot of very good data and great stories. And I think the more the public hears about how this is enriching kids' lives and also, frankly, improving achievement in other areas because of what we know about arts education, I think that's very compelling. And I think the districts should be encouraged to share some of those stories.
If I could just follow on from that, I know there's others wanting to speak too. My question earlier about Centennial, some of the schools have arts teachers and others don't. That district ought to be able to look, if everything else is equal in that district, which I assume it is because that's what they're trying to do, the outcomes should be better on standardized tests in the kids, in the schools with music instruction compared with those who don't. And that would be the ultimate validation of our tax and also maybe encourage the school districts to prioritize arts funding within their own budgets.
True. I want to say one thing. Marna hosted a wonderful get-together, sorry, is not the right word, kind of conference of arts and education with some national people yesterday. And he was reviewing a lot of statistics about the benefits of arts education. And the one thing he said public officials are very in tune with is that it really improves, first thing it improves is attendance. So that might be an easier metric to begin with.
Could I give sort of a weird contrarian view, since this is an arts tax, and so I feel like I can be a little artistic with my narrative here? I think the public overwhelmingly understands the value of arts education. When I think about this, I don't think that there's a hard argument to be made to convince people that arts education is important. That's just my personal bias, and I could be totally wrong.
You're not
And I'd
wrong.
be happy to hear contrarian views. So really the question for me that I think people are asking isn't, does arts education work? I think they're going to be focused on a whole completely different set of narratives. Does my kid have access to it? Do underprivileged kids have access to it? Do kids of color have access to it? Do kids who speak English as a second language have access to it? And that's why this 5% thing is really important to me, because it's a bellwether on how we're spending the dollars. And if you're spending it on overhead, that means you're not spending it on access and equity issues around an arts education. And so that's why I heard what you were saying, and as Commissioner Saltzman said, your logic is unimpeachable. But I want to hear a little more and dig a little deeper. But
Mayor, there's
sure, Commissioner Fish.
there's a missing piece of this.
Yeah.
So, and we should ask the experts, but my understanding is we're hitting the amount on the one. We're still falling short on the other and the fee. So this tax was contemplated to raise funds for two buckets. One was arts education, the rest was grant making.
Correct.
We are fulfilling, and the first dollars go to arts education. We're meeting that requirement. We're falling short on the grants, and because it's a tax and not a property tax measure, and it's a tax that has to be collected, we're spending a lot of money administering this that you wouldn't on a property tax measure. So that becomes the question. How the money is spent is an open debate, but the dollars for the arts education piece is being met, as I understand it. And the question is, we said to the voters we'd do both. We would do arts education first, and the remaining dollars would go to grant programs, which are also very popular. We are hitting those dollars, so the question is, are they getting out to the right people and making a difference? The grant money is the part that is falling short, and that's what in part complicates the cap.
So Commissioner, could you help me out here and just be more specific? It's falling short because in the context of the ballot measure, we promised more going towards grants, or in what way are we
So
falling short?
I didn't draft the ballot measure, but my understanding is when it was crafted in the last few months of the Adams administration, and the council referred it was someone sat down and said, okay, here's the formula. We expect to generate X. We'd like to keep administrative costs at a certain level, and if we generate X, then we can stay below a 5% cap. Council came in and, based on some legal advice, tweaked the arts tax. We did some things to make it fairer and address some legal concerns that were raised. That took some people out of the pool, so that brought the amount down. And despite heroic efforts by Thomas, we're now at 73% compliance, not 100% compliance. So what Thomas is gonna, when he comes back in a few weeks and we have this broader discussion, the question is, there's a cost of administering it and a cost of collecting. And even if you fall short, there's still a challenge to, he's going to argue, to staying below an administrative cap under that system. Council's going to have 3 or 4 options, and my guess is that people are going to have very strong feelings about those options. That's not today's program, but we're going to get a preview of it. But that's essentially why. It was designed as if it was going to generate X dollars, and so the administrative cap could stay below 5% because it was assumed it would cost a certain amount to administer it. The additional money we're spending trying to collect it is helping to blow the cap, but because it's a tax and not a levy. For example, Dan Salzman doesn't spend half of every day chasing property tax filers. I mean, his is baked into the property tax. The property taxes are paid. Dan gets his allocation.
Children's subject. Yeah, let's be clear
All right,
about
I mean,
that.
excuse me. No, wait a second.
So Dan Saltzman's property tax. I follow you, Commissioner. I
And
follow you.
I only draw that distinction because they were two different kinds of programs funded differently. So Dan doesn't get up in the morning looking at the spreadsheet from OMF every day about property tax collection. This is a tax that requires everybody to participate, and we're at 73%. So we're either gonna downsize the administration with consequences. We're either gonna raise the cap, and if we raise the cap, one of the options that we presented to you, I suppose, is to use a couple $100,000 in general fund dollars to do it, to see whether you can boost the success rate above 73%. But there are 3 or 4 choices, and ultimately the council has to decide, and we've had this question staring at us for the last 3 years. Each report has said there's this problem. We now have to structurally fix it, and Thomas is going to come back in a few weeks. Am I right on that, Thomas?
Actually, it was a few weeks ago, I provided I'm Thomas Lanham, I'm the Revenue Division Director. On August 25th, I sent your offices a memorandum laying out some options, so you have that information. I'll resend it to make sure you.
Yeah, and I think we're going to have a robust discussion. I have a feeling where some of my colleagues are leading. That's not today's hearing, because these wonderful volunteers have absolutely nothing to do with the question of the overhead. And I think the question I would put to Thomas is, we're up to 73% now of the folks who have to pay the tax. But that's up from a low of what?
We began in the low 60s. If I could offer some comments and
Please.
some context, I think it might be helpful. So the proposition to voters in 2012 was simply this, that for every dollar that you pay the city in this tax, 95 cents will go to the arts organizations and to school districts to hire teachers. That's a measure of efficiency. That's a good measure, but a better measure is a measure of effectiveness. So the dynamic that Craig was talking about is that with a 5% cost cap, what we've said in a nutshell is we're willing to spend $1 to collect $20 for the arts, but we are not willing to spend $2 to collect the next $20 for the arts, because that exceeds the cost cap. If we were approaching this from a private sector, purely business perspective, we would say that's a pretty good deal to spend $2 to collect the next $20 to maximize the revenue going to the Regional Arts and Culture Council. So the 5% cost cap is actually constraining us from maximizing the revenue. So again, it's a measure of effectiveness, efficiency, but not effectiveness.
And if I hold on that for a second, again, I'm going to use the Dan Salzman example. If someone doesn't pay their property taxes, Dan doesn't get a knock on the door saying, you have to pony up some children's levy money to supplement the county and city efforts to collect property taxes. It is handled differently. And so, and I want to urge the council not to prejudge this issue today, because I know we're going to have strong feelings, and I think it's a very important debate. But the question of collecting a tax, to me, is broader than just what was in a measure. And if there are extraordinary barriers that we're facing, I think the council at least deserves to hear what the range of options are, because we are collecting a tax that has a public benefit. And I think it's, in some instances, unfair to just assume that that is exclusively the burden of the arts tax, since we are talking about collecting a tax, and the city ultimately is the administrator of this program.
A few more remarks, if I may. No income tax is 100% collected. The IRS, for example, tremendous powers to garnish wages, seize assets. They're reporting a voluntary compliance, all-in compliance rate after voluntary compliance of 85 to 86%, and that's the IRS. So we're never going to get to 100%. A property tax, usually you're looking at a compliance rate of 98 to 99%, because ultimately you've got a lien on the property to secure the interests of government. So it's extremely efficient to collect a property tax compared to an income tax. The arts tax has approximately 1 FTE for every 100,000 accounts administered. So closer to best practice would be 1 FTE to 7,500 to 10,000 accounts, just to give you a sense of kind of how far out of a standard best practice you might see in terms of maximizing the revenue. There are a number of things that we're bringing online right now that should increase the compliance rate to, we think, 80% or more, so getting much closer in line with what we have seen from the IRS. That's the IRS data exchange, so we're receiving taxpayer information directly from the IRS. And when we fully engage and are able to fully utilize that information, it will really help us to figure out who we haven't heard from and to collect more of the tax. You've also authorized 3 years of funding for us to modernize and update our databases, which will again be a sea change in terms of how we can use that data and how we can collect for the arts tax, as well as other taxes like the business license tax, the transient lodging tax, and others. And then finally, we continue to use the collection agency as authorized by this body last year for accounts that are seriously past due, that owe $100 or more, that have received a final demand letter, have received fair notice, have been given multiple opportunities to rectify the account. And so we're taking all those measures and we are seeing results. If we had strictly adhered to the cost cap in 2016, we would have terminated all collection activity in April of that calendar year. In other words, we would have taken all the checks that we had received, voluntary compliance, we would have put them in the bank. We would have had about $8.2 million. We had $8.2 million in revenue at that point, and we had hit the 5% cost cap. We had spent $425,000 at that point. So if we adhere to the cost cap, we would have been done at that point. But that's not good business sense. So we continued to spend money to collect more money. And so from May to December of 2016, we spent an additional $524,000 to collect $2.5 million more dollars. So the cost of collection on that second part of the year was 20%, way above 5%, but still a pretty good deal because that's $2.5 million that RAC would not have had we adhered to the cap. So that's the dynamic that we're faced with around the cost cap. So the fix that we're recommending in brief is that we believe that had taxpayers been given a different choice in 2012, had they been given the choice of maximizing dollars available to RAC and holding non-compliant taxpayers accountable, as opposed to just stop after you've spent 5% and whoever didn't pay gets off the hook, they would have chosen the first option. It's the option that makes most business sense, and certainly it's the option that RAC understands best because it hits their bottom line in a very big way. And I think that's why the AOC is recommending that we do this, make this change.
I'm
Is
going
that-
to
I
take
mean-
us in a different direction, so go.
Oh, well, I guess,
Yeah.
you know, I understand logically everything you're saying, but I guess I also understand that it seems to me if we're serious that we want to increase our administrative rate, in other words, decrease the amount of money that goes to RAC and the schools, which is really what we're saying, in a way. And when voters think 95% of the money is going to go towards supporting programs, and we're telling them it's really not 95% anymore, I mean, that sort of begs the question, maybe we should go back to the voters with the proper numbers, or ask the question the way you want to have it asked. And I know nobody wants to go there because nobody wants to dare ask the voters to reconsider the arts tax because everybody's afraid they'll can it, and they may. But, you know, in the same sense of candor and being straight with people, it seems like that's really the question you're asking. Should we go back to the voters with a revised ballot measure that more truly reflects the conditions as we understand them today? I mean, that's, to me, the most straightforward, straight shooting approach to it. I realize nobody in this room wants to do that because we're all scared. But I welcome your thoughts.
Well, I certainly wouldn't recommend that. I think it's important to recognize that even at 7.7%, which is where we stand now, by any measure that you find out there about the efficiency and the effectiveness of, say, nonprofits that you can give money to, like the United Way for Disaster Relief, that's considered an excellent benchmark. I think 5% was too aggressive out of the gate. I'll be very candid. I think 5% polled very well in 2012 as a number to shoot for, but it was never realistic. And so I think that's all come home to roost now. And I think the average taxpayer, again, and this may go back into your point, Commissioner, but it makes no sense for us to stop collecting at 5% and effectively walk away from $2.5 million at the expense of $500,000 to collect.
So I have a comment to that, but Commissioner Daly.
I'm really going to take us in a different direction, so I'd rather you just make your comment.
So, look, it's a vague memory in the waning days of the Adams administration when this came to council. I do think the children's levy was kind of a model that people looked at. In fact, many of the same people were involved in crafting this. And again, it's just, I don't want to beat a dead horse here, but the children's levy doesn't spend the bulk of the staff doesn't spend the bulk of its time doing collections. They administer it, they set criteria, they evaluate requests, they monitor how dollars are spent. In other words, it's an accountability piece.
Right, I would actually go so far as to say, as it turns out, it's easier to give money away than to collect it.
Yeah, this has turned into something else. The way this was structured, the administrative overhead is really about funding Thomas's collection agency. And I actually, my initial reaction is that as long as we figure out over time to keep faith with the 5% cap, which just means that 5%, no more than 5% of the dollars we collect goes to some that 95 cents on the dollar goes out to either students or arts organizations, and 5% goes to everything else. I'd actually make a different argument, which is, I don't think it's broken. I don't think we have to go back to the voters. I think the city should step up with the general fund and supplement the difference. And my understanding is that would be a couple $100,000 now and again. But I think we should think about it as an investment in boosting the success of the arts tax, not criticizing an obvious structural flaw in setting a cap that wasn't related to a meaningful indicator. Because it's no one's fault that we're spending extra money to collect the money. And as you've pointed out, it is completely counterproductive not to collect the money, because then everyone loses, the kids and the grantees, and the voters are expected to have a certain amount. So I'm going to at least ask that, as among the various options we consider, referring it back to the voters, cannibalizing the program, doing various other things, thinking about a general fund, because there's nothing in what we refer to the voters that says we can't cover a city function of collecting dollars to actually benefit a program called the arts tax.
And that's one of the options we identified in the memo.
And so what if we spend the extra money and we still don't get the extra revenue? Then what?
Well, we're spending the extra money, and we are getting the extra revenue now. So the cost cap issue, one of the ways that it can be resolved is that if there was a general fund subsidy of approximately $200,000 a year, what we would do is charge the collection expenses against that subsidy first, before then charging them to the arts tax fund, and that's how you actually get to the 5%. So the dollars that voters, the taxpayers send in are not the first bucket that you dip into to cover the collection, so you get to the 5%. The added benefit of that approach, I mean, there are pros and cons to all of these, and they're laid out in the memorandum, but one of the benefits of that approach is dollar for dollar, the $200,000 a year flows to RAC, because the expenses in the fund are being reduced dollar for dollar, and the third bucket, which is the bucket that's receiving all of these extra enforcement dollars, is RAC.
Let me suggest this. I mean, this is a hard conversation, and it's not one we're going to resolve here today. And this is not really what the committee is reporting on today, although I think they are right to give us a preface of the discussion to come. And it is not going to be an easy conversation, and it gets to the question of priorities. And it means we will probably have to revisit some of the narrative that's been coming up year after year after year since the day this was originally implemented. And if I've known anything about these colleagues on this particular city council, we are willing to make hard choices to correct problems that have existed in the past. We're willing to own those problems. We're willing to be transparent with the public about the mistakes that we made and the consequences of those mistakes and what we're going to do to fix them, to be right with the people who we represent. But we're not going to resolve it here today. So I'd like to go to Commissioner Udaley, if I could, Commissioner Fish, and have her, I think you're going to take us in a different direction related to the report we're actually hearing today. Is that correct?
Well, that's the 3 o'clock time certain? Or this?
No, this
No,
is.
no. We're just finishing up on this, but we're focused, I think we've gone down the rabbit hole of the arts tax
Thank you.
collection.
So, Carla,
and
who
it's-
signed up to testify?
Just one person, Shedrick Wilkins.
Okay, so Commissioner Udaley.
All right,
Well,
good.
At the risk of going down another rabbit's hole, first, I'd just like to say thank you for the report. I was a supporter of the arts tax. I was an invited participant in the town hall, community town halls that happened leading up to it. I largely agree with the tax. I do not agree with the exemption level of $15,000. But first, I want to talk about outreach, because I know just, anecdotally, there's remains a lot of confusion in the community about the arts tax. If you're new to town, you may not know it exists. Even if you're not new to town, you may think that you're paying it in your other tax bills. You may think that if your husband or wife or spouse pays it, that you don't have to pay it. And you may simply not be able to afford it, and in that case, you're accruing a penalty. So
Yeah.
I see in 2016 that, you ramped up outreach. I guess we don't have to really delve into it now, but I just want to put it out there that I see that as one of the ongoing problems. We have this gap in compliance for eligible taxpayers of, 22%? Are we at 78 right now?
We're at 73, and we really
73.
would like to see it 80 or more.
Okay.
So,
But we have an extraordinarily low number of people who are actually exempt applying for the exemption. So there's just clearly still a lot of misunderstanding in the community. And then my other question, which is, I don't want to spend too much time on it. I don't know how that $15,000 exemption was arrived at. It seems arbitrary to me. It seems too low for 2012, and it's certainly too low for 2017, when we've seen rent increases of 60% in the last several years, when the wage required to afford housing in Portland is somewhere around $24 an hour, and $15,000 is just a couple $1,000s above the federal poverty level. So that means a single parent household making, could actually be living below the federal poverty line and still on the hook for our arts tax. And that's not acceptable to me.
Right, and so it was a decision in 2012 to make the exemption level at 100% of poverty. There were a lot of voices that wanted to make it higher. The pushback is that less money, unless you raise the rate from 35 to 50 or some other number. So, ultimately that was a political decision to place it there, but I can tell you without any hesitation that my staff takes a great number of very difficult calls from people who are in financial distress, who are barely able to pay, or are just barely on the wrong side of needing to pay. We do our level best to temper our collection efforts, taking those persons' considerations into circumstances into consideration. We have payment plans, and we also have a very targeted collection approach where we attempt to identify those taxpayers that are non-compliant, that have the highest income, and focus our efforts them on those areas first. And the main reason for that, of course, is because from a risk basis, those are the people that are most able to pay. So there's some steps that we are taking. I guess the other thing I would say, and not everyone uses third-party tax preparation software. Many, many people do. Over half the people in the community do. We've just secured, and Commissioner Fritz in particular has been pushing this issue year after year. She's a TurboTax user. I don't think you would mind my saying so. And we've finally secured their agreement. We've been in the TurboTax application for some time, but they finally have agreed to pre-populate the data and to make it more like the state form, where you're not required to re-enter everything. It's just going to flow to that part of the form and make it that much easier for people. The same thing with the H&R Block application. So we're doing some things like that. In terms of a more direct outreach budget, we do mail to every single household every year. So if you moved into Portland that year, you should still get notification. Also, our penalty waiver guidelines recognize that people that just moved here wouldn't have had the 5 years of history and understanding about this thing. And so anyone who moved here and fails to pay and file can apply for a penalty waiver on the basis of, I just moved into town, and those are approved automatically. So we're doing our best to be fair about how we collect this tax.
Thank you.
And just
Commissioner
a
Fritz?
quick question for the city attorney. Are we allowed, is the council allowed to change the arts tax without going back to the ballot measure?
As a citizen-approved amendment to the city code, the council retains the ability to modify the code subsequent. It's a political restriction more than a legal restriction.
Thank you. And so, Commissioner, for the last 4 years, I've been interested in making some of the changes that you outlined. I think that is a conversation that we should be having.
Mayor, let me make the following suggestion since we're bumping up against another time certain. Thomas has laid out some options for consideration. There's some related issues that our colleagues have. I think we should ask Thomas to have those conversations with each office, see if we can get to some consensus about next steps. And we have one person who signed up to testify, and then I think we should thank and discharge these wonderful people.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
How
Thank
many
you.
people have signed up? Just Cedric?
Yes.
Very good. Come on up, sir.
Yeah, I'm Shedrick Wilkins, and I support the art tax. in lieu of the cuts under Measure 97. I think the arts is central to education. I'm not too sure if high school football is, or chemistry classes where you could blow yourself up. You don't really have to do that. It's better just to explain how you mix the chemicals together. So, but it's central that people learn to perform. In fact, just as kids learn to perform, so does the city council. If you look at just the paper, the sheet of you make it come alive, you talk about it. And that's the arts, okay? It's not just something you stare at, because I don't know what's important on this thing, you know. You have to come here and say something. So in that way, you're performing artists. And I like the way music sometimes makes history. My kids are in middle school. They're in their 20s. They were learning world history, so I threw in Billy Joel's "We Didn't Start the Fire," where he makes everything rhyme, Khrushchev, Kennedy, and all this stuff. And I love Billy Joel's "Allentown," about how you use up all the coal and everybody doesn't have a job or something. And it's just his way of like saying this stuff, of saying history, but you hum it in your head and it kind of sticks in there. So
Thanks for getting it stuck in my head.
yeah, and Billy Joel is just amazing. I mean, he's a philosopher. He's not just a performer. So when you get the arts, you get philosophy. And if you're going to cut things, things that like sports or science, don't cut the arts.
Mayor, I move the accept the report.
Second.
We have a motion from Commissioner Fish, a second from Commissioner Fritz. Any further conversation? Please call the roll.
Saltzman,
Well, I appreciate the work of the Oversight Committee. Where'd they go? Oh, they're there. Thank you. Thank you for your work. And it sounds like we'll have a more protracted discussion about the issue of administrative expenses under the arts tax, and we'll have that at a later date. Aye.
Udaly,
Thanks for the report. Aye.
Fritz.
Thank you for your work and for the report. This has been an ongoing thing. It's good to see others have stepped up when the first group have been termed out, so thank you for that. Commissioner, I'm really happy to hear that you are interested in perhaps some changes, maybe something when we consider the next batch of things to do with administrative costs. What if we had a scholarship fund so that, again, the general fund could help out some of the folks that you mentioned as being particularly cost burdened, rather than making changes, because of course all of us do want to do what we promised we would do in ballot measures. So I think there's a lot of values and principles involved in that discussion. I look forward to having it. Aye.
Fish.
Well, first I want to thank the Prescott Elementary School kids and their teacher, Carolyn Langston, for joining us today. And I love it when we begin council meetings with children performing music. It's as good as it gets. Thank you to Chair Gibbons and Nancy Helmsworth. On page 3 of the report are all the other members of the committee. We owe them a debt of gratitude for their service. We have a couple of tough issues to grapple with as a council, but today I think our role is to accept the report and thank you for a job well done. Aye.
Wheeler.
So I want to be very clear. I support the premises behind the arts tax. And I was there at those early conversations. I think Sam called it like the Creative Coalition or something. I can't remember exactly what it was. He's very good at that. And I enjoyed those early conversations, and I felt like we built a strong community consensus for the need for this revenue source. It has, of course, been plagued with some administrative issues. As I said, I think this council is up to the task of resolving those administrative issues, and I look forward to hearing the ideas that will come out of the Revenue Office. I hope we also think more broadly about creative financing structures. You know, I have heard people say in some of these discussions over the last 5 years about the tax collection, I've heard people say, you know, the tax I pay in my household, it's a bargain for what we think we get out of it. And then on the other hand, you have households who say, you know, truthfully, I can't afford it. This is one more thing that just adds to the cost of living, and we're already struggling to make ends meet. So I hope that in the weeks ahead, as we have these conversations, I hope there's a creative solution out there that gives people who really are passionate about arts education and the grant opportunities that Commissioner Fish mentioned. Is there a way to meld private nonprofit and the public sector here? Is there an opportunity for people to make contributions voluntary that they would like to see towards the arts, towards arts education, towards supporting the kinds of programs that the young people exemplified at the beginning of our session today, to potentially be a source of funding to help supplant or offset some of these other shortfalls that we've seen in the program, or alternative, create effectively a scholarship program for people who truly cannot afford this tax. I just feel like there are creative answers we haven't put on the table yet that should be on the table, creativity worthy of an arts discussion. So with that, that was longer than I wanted to do. I vote aye. I support this report. I accept the report. I thank those of you who are willing to volunteer to be on this committee. The fact that we talked so little today about your actual report, I think speaks volumes about the trust and support we have for you as our fellow residents in this community, and we really appreciate your all stepping up to do the work you do. It's much, much appreciated. Thank you. Aye. The report is obviously accepted.
Can we take a 2-minute compassion break?
2-minute compassion break, then we'll get into our second and final option issue for today, which is the engineer's report for Providence Park.
Ted, can I just grab this?
Yeah. please read the next item.
Item 1018, accept city engineer's report for Providence Park Stadium expansion above grade encroachment.
Commissioner Saltzman.
Thank you, Mayor. This is a report related to Providence Park expansion, as the title implies, and it would allow them to do an encroachment of our right-of-way, and I'll turn it over to PBOT to give more details.
Okay. Good afternoon, Mayor and Commissioners. My name is Bob Haley. I work with PBOT's Development.
Bob, I'm sorry, is your microphone on? Can you see if the light is on?
Oh, there we go.
There. Yeah, thank you.
Again, good afternoon, Mayor and Commissioners. My name is Bob Haley. I work with PBOT's Development Review Section up in the 1900 building, and I'm here to present the city engineer's report and recommendation.
One moment, I'm sorry. Carl, are we getting the feed? Yes. Okay, our screens are just black, but if you're seeing it up there, I assume there it is. Okay, good.
Okay. I gave you some hard copies in case it goes blank again of the PowerPoint presentation.
Very good, thank you, sir.
Okay.
It's good, it's working now.
Okay. So we don't usually see these very often, at least council doesn't. We brought two last year for an OHSU Skybridge and a small extension of Portland State Universities, and those were the first two in over 10 years. And one of the major policies of the encroachment review process is to discourage the private use of the public right-of-way. So that's why it's very rare that you see them. You'll see arcaded structures on East Burnside, newer ones which are now allowed without city council approval because there's actually design guidelines that encourage that type of development on East Burnside from about MLK to 12th. So the Design Commission is charged with reviewing the encroachment within the public right-of-way and making a recommendation to the city engineer, who then brings this report with a recommendation to city council. Design Commission recommended approval for this on August 3rd, and subsequently the city engineer's report was published, and now we're here today. So I'll go through a very short presentation. The site is zoned, as you know, it's zoned open space with a design overlay zone. The open space zone continues out into the middle of the right-of-way. The approval criteria are found in this June of 1982 encroachments in the public right-of-way. The approval criteria are all in Section 1, and therefore downtown general policies, downtown policies, pedestrian district policies, and standards for encroachments. Included in the city engineer's report, you'll find findings and responses that address all of the related policies for this review. One of the major ones for encroachment is that there be a public benefit. What's stated in the city engineer's report is there's two that PDOT strongly, or at least one that PDOT is strongly in favor of. The other one I think is more of a citywide issue. This is a $50 to $55 million voluntary improvement to a city-owned facility, Providence Park. In addition, we believe that we're going to have enhanced pedestrian safety on Southwest 18th with the additional of a sidewalk width widening from about 12 feet today to 17 feet. And within the structure itself, there's been an increased amount of exits added in alignment with the crosswalks in Southwest 18th. TriMet was concerned that after games, it just gets pretty chaotic out there with people spilling across the street into the light rail line. So we'll try and continue to improve that. There was discussion during the design review whether we do a permanent railing that along the curb line or just allow the Providence Park to continue to use the temporary railings they do. The consensus was that let them try the temporary railings and see if they continue to make that work.
I'm sorry, I hate to be ignorant. I don't know what you're talking about. Could you be more specific?
Okay, along Southwest 18th, currently when games get out, the exits sort of bring you out onto the sidewalk. There's two crosswalks, but people tend to just go straight across, meander across 18th mid-block, across the bus lane and across the two light rail lines to get to the other side of 18th and to the light rail station on that side. What this proposal does is takes that sidewalk, widens it, continues the use of these temporary railings they place along the curb lines, except for at the crosswalks. So it's really directing people there. This will put more room on that crosswalk for people to comfortably move that way. But in addition, the interior remodel of the stadium has added additional exits at the crosswalk alignments. And this is shown on the current slide I have here, where you have the two circles. is where there's been additional turnstile exits to leave the stadium.
I see, and then in between these two areas that are circled in red, there will be a railing to guide people to the crosswalk. Is that what you're describing?
During Timbers events, there's a temporary railing that they'll put up during the games.
Okay. And
There was discussion of making that a permanent railing, but I think with all the wires coming down and the mesh on the front of the stadium itself, that another metal railing would possibly feel a little too cage-like inside that sidewalk corridor.
Okay, I see.
Would they, if they wanted to have one later, would they have to go back through a design review?
I think if there's a permanent one, they would have to go back. It may be as something as a type 2.
Thank you.
The other thing, just to mention for information, if you see in these slides pictures of banners and signage on the outside of the stadium, those have not been approved by the Design Commission. That's a separate type 3 to go back for signage. So,
Is that true just with even temporary banners, like the ones, you still go through design review for that?
I don't know. We have design review staff here who could discuss whether or not we have temporary
It's not
banners.
critical, I was just curious.
I don't think they're temporary, though. I think they're intended to be permanent.
Yeah.
Seems to me when we did the MLS All-Star game, we authorized some temporary banners. I don't think they went through design review.
Yeah, I think this policy, because this might be in the right of way. I know we do it for the marathon and a lot of other special events where we allow banners on our streetlight poles downtown. But there may
We
be
just don't
someone
tell
here.
Julie. We do it, and we just hope she doesn't see it when she's riding to work.
Okay, I'll continue on.
By the way, the extra 5 feet on the sidewalk is because you're removing the parking, essentially.
Correct. We're moving the curb out 5 feet. So there
And
was a sort
getting-
of substandard with parking lane there.
And the benefit is a safer sidewalk.
Correct.
But where would people using mobility devices get dropped off?
I'm not sure. I think maybe right after this place, there's a sort of a curb cut and a driveway into the sort of emergency access between the Multnomah Athletic Club and here. Whether or not that could be signed for ADA pickup and drop off, I'm not sure. We can look into it during the Public Works.
Thank you.
Okay. Here you just have an aerial sort of orienting you. On the east side is Southwest 18th, west side is Southwest 20th, and Morrison is on the north side. This was presented as one of the inspirations for doing a major encroachment. This is the original architect, A.E. Doyle's rendering from 1925 that shows a fully arcaded structure along Southwest 18th.
Was this ever constructed?
The design team can tell you, I don't believe it was ever constructed. It was just part of the original design drawings, and it changed before it was finally constructed. There is hints of that on the Southwest 20th frontage. There are bays. This is sort of a cross-section, and I drew in the property line in red so you can see everything on the right of that line is what's the encroachment. That's the structure that'll be in public right-of-way. It'll be approximately 94 feet tall at its height.
And let's, just to be clear here, the structure that is encroaching is owned by the city of Portland.
Yes, Providence Park is a city of Portland. It's managed by OMF.
Okay.
And so it will significantly increase the value of that city asset with this improvement. This, if you can read it, on the top is the existing curb alignment along Southwest 18th. You can see where that little indent is where the existing parking lane is. And the width of the sidewalk is 12 feet from property line to the curb. On the bottom shows after the curb has been moved out 5 feet, we get a 17.5-foot sidewalk corridor, including the curb. On your right-hand side of this screen is the existing sidewalk and street configuration with a 12-foot sidewalk, 7.5-foot clear for the pedestrians, and then a 4-foot furnishing zone where street trees, street lights, catenary poles for the light rail are located. And on the left side, you see the widened sidewalk where there's 11-foot clear between any structures and then an additional 5 feet beyond the structure and the furnishing zone. That'll be less cluttered because we are combining the street lights with dual capacity as acting as the light rail support as well for their wires. I can't remember exactly how many. I think there may be 4 or 5 total. The engineering phase will try and space them so they're aesthetically centered with some symmetry to the improvements of the tube structure coming down. It's also the encroachment itself, besides the tube, the building section that comes out, which is going to contain hallways, restrooms, vendor facilities, those types of supports. There's no seats in the actual encroachment. Those are still within the private property line of the park. The clearance over the sidewalk is a little over 22 feet. And you can see there's a pendant light system that will light it up quite well. This is just a drawing of what it will look like from the inside of the park. These are some renderings of the top view is what the existing looks like looking north on 18th. And the bottom is a picture after the encroachment and the sidewalk widening of what that southwest 18th corridor will look like. This is just a wider view of how it will be done. The street lights and the wire support system for the light rail are all beyond where these tiebacks or these tubes come down and get mounted to the sidewalk. It's proposed to be constructed in 2 phases. Phase 1 will begin, they're hoping, this October, next month. And what that will include is almost all the work that's done in the right-of-way. We're moving the curbs, relocating the street lights, the catenary poles. The only section of the encroachment that will be built in this first year, between October and March, is putting the foundations in where those tubes come down and connect. And those will be covered up again. So at the end of March, you won't really see anything other than just the new widened sidewalk.
What are they anchored to?
A very highly engineered deep footing. I'm not sure the depth of it will be below grade, but that's what will hold them. Phase 2 is next October 18 of 2018 through March of 2019. That's the work that will include the majority, if not all of the work of the above structure over the sidewalk, and including the cable structure and the new sort of transparent roof system that they've designed. So with that, the city engineer is recommending approval subject to the following conditions. I provided a memo where I amended condition number 1. This report was written 5 or 6 weeks ago, and we're taking a while to work things out. The original condition just stated that the applicant shall enter into a lease agreement with the city prior to issuance of a building permit. In speaking with managers of our right-of-way acquisition group and representatives from OMF, it was determined that a formal lease may not be needed and they may be able to accomplish the same thing with an inter-bureau agreement. And in addition, instead of having to have that agreement completed by next month, we said that's not really going to go into effect until the Timbers fans can actually sit in the seats, not until in the season of 2019. That condition says either a lease or an inter-bureau agreement must be finalized prior to Phase 2 building permits. So that moves it up from this October to next October for the city to negotiate those agreements in-house to make sure whatever they do is in line with existing agreements between OMF and the Timbers organization. And I'm here if you have any questions. We have
have a
staff
question.
from a number of bureaus and public to speak.
So I have a question.
Sure.
And, because I know this will come up later, and I want to know what we're going to say in response. So the current existing design has an overhang, and it's fenced all the way to the edge of the overhang. So the public right-of-way is exposed to the elements. Under the new design, the public right-of-way is covered, protected, and lighted. Who is responsible for security in that new, large, covered public right-of-way?
That's a good question. I'd imagine it falls to the city, but maybe someone from OMF. I don't know if there's agreements. You're talking about probably during non-Timbers games events?
Or both.
Okay, because for both?
Yeah,
I believe
well,
the Timbers organization is responsible for they have a crowd management program where they have security staff and others to help direct people where to go. During the rest of the time, I would assume it's the same people who have responsibility for activities on our sidewalks, which is going to be the city.
I think we need to get that clarified, don't we, Mayor?
I think we need to get that clarified.
Okay?
And what the arrangement is with Peregrine and others, because
You shoved him in. You, get in there.
Before
You're
you,
in.
before you jump in, since you're not on my screen, we're sure that the public can see it. Is there some reason we can't see it? Can we
There it
turn
is.
off, can we
Carlos
turn off
mad
the?
at us.
There it goes.
Good, sure.
No, it's not.
Thanks, Brendan. Good afternoon, Mayor, Commissioners. Kurt Kruger with Development Review of Transportation. Unless otherwise specified by city code, the sidewalk maintenance obligation falls to the abutting property. So to answer your question, the city would be obligated to maintain that right away out to the curb line.
But that is going to be something we'll need to look into in terms of the contract with Peregrine for this.
I think the maintenance agreement is clear throughout the city. The responsibility for maintenance, it falls with the abutting property owner. So this would be OMF for the maintenance of the surface facilities. We maintain the streetlights. TriMet maintains catenary poles. But I think you were asking about security
I'm trying to
issues.
head off a PR disaster.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a strong supporter of this project, so make no mistake about it. I supported it, I vote for it. I think it's a net huge positive for the city, for the people who live here. But let's be honest, when you create a block-long covered space, given what's going on in our community, it's going to be full of people many of whom will call it home. And then people are going to start calling us, including potentially the Timbers organization, saying, what are you going to do about it? So before we get there, and while we still have plans on the table, let's talk about it. What are we going to do about it?
We do have a representative from the Timbers, the Senior Vice President of Operations is here. I wasn't sure he was planning on testifying on this issue. And also, I think from the design team and the architecture team and the land use team, they may have some ideas of what they've planned for those
I
operations.
just think it would be naive of us and irresponsible not to have the conversation now when we can.
Yeah, good afternoon.
Particularly since the condition of approval says all areas underneath the arcade shall be open to the public.
Correct. My name's Ken Puckett. I'm the Senior Vice President of Operations for Providence Park, and I've actually run your wonderful building for 17 years. I was hired in June 26, 2000, so I've been through all the construction projects and been there since then. We have a robust security plan. We have covered areas on both plazas now that we take care of, we clean, we police. Our agreement with OMF is that is our responsibility to keep that area clean, to keep the sidewalks repaired, and we have done that for 17 years and don't see that changing, to be completely honest.
So is that your expectation with regard to the new covered area that would be created?
100%, yes. We have covered areas on both plazas today that we actively clean, take care of, police. We have 24-hour security at the park. We have 365 days a year, even on Christmas. The building is always staffed, and we're always taking care of the city's jewel. I mean, I take that really responsible.
Thank you, sir.
Who
I
pays for
appreciate
that?
it.
Yes,
Who pays for that?
we do.
Who's
Peregrine.
we? Peregrine does.
Yes, it's in our operating agreement with the city.
And your expectation would be things like the Timbers Army camping out the night before would not be shifted to this area, it would continue to be along?
Well, they do go around that corner on Seattle games, so, I mean, I'm sure they'll go there, but the line starts around the corner, so it depends on how many get in line.
Isn't that, though, going to generate a question of who gets to be there? If Timbers Army tents get to be there on game days or the day before, but tents sheltering people who, as the mayor says, may call it home, would not be allowed there? I think that's a problem.
Well, I mean, folks don't camp out to get, they just stand in line. Some bring tents, some bring chairs. It's kind of two different things, I think. And we normally, they don't, unless it's Seattle, they don't camp out for multiple days, you know.
Well, I have seen tents up the night before.
Yes, I'm not going to dispute that.
Yeah, but the bottom line is you're responsible for security and maintenance of that area.
100%, and we
Very
have been
good.
for 17 years, and in all the different agreements, you know, I've worked when it was Civic Stadium, PG Park, Sheldon Field, and now Providence, so.
I also would vote for you for a facility historian as well. That's
Yes,
a
thank you.
remarkable run. Thank you.
Yeah.
Really
Can I ask,
appreciate
since
it.
you're here, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
So I live around the corner, and let's say I go to a Thorns game or something. The one kind of choke point currently is is just down the street, next to the Providence Health Facility when
Right.
you're trying to get in. Sometimes that's backed up a little bit.
Right.
And you've got people checking bags, and then you gotta go through security, and there's two doors. Does this redesign improve in any way the access point along that street?
It does. I think we're adding, we have 2 current gates there. I think we're going to 5 in that
Okay.
area. And then we're improving that we're moving the Providence Clinic entrance back to add some more sidewalk and some more
Good.
queuing area in that spot. And then the other thing we're looking at doing is actually now, if you get a ticket, you can come in any gate that you'd like. So moving forward, we're going to have, like, if you're sitting in section 201, you'll be directed to a certain gate, and your ticket will only work at that gate. So that'll help spread out the fans a little bit more to the different access to get in a little bit easier.
Good, thank you.
So we've thought that one through as well.
Very good. And is there anything more to your formal presentation, or was that it?
That's it.
Thank you for coming up
Thank you. I was
and
very nervous, so I
clarifying.
appreciate that.
Colleagues, anything more before we call for public testimony? Very good. Carla, how many people do we have signed up?
I have 2, and we also have the amendment still to vote to motion. To move that amendment.
Dan, do you want to move the amendment first before we take testimony?
I'm sorry, what was it?
We move the amendment to condition 1.
Second?
Okay.
So Commissioner Saltzman moves, Commissioner Fish seconds. Any further discussion on the amendment? Hearing none, please call the roll on the amendment.
Saltzman,
Aye.
Udaley,
Aye.
Fritz.
Aye.
Fish.
Aye?
Wheeler.
Aye, the amendment is adopted. Now we'll hear public testimony.
Yeah, we have 2 people, Julie Livingston and Robert Butler.
Very good. Come on up. Name for the record, please.
So, hello, Mayor Wheeler and Commissioners. My name is Julie Livingston, and I am the Chair of the Portland Design Commission. And I am here today to tell you that the Design Commission supports both the expansion to Providence Park and the major encroachment. The arcade is an excellent response both to the Central City Fundamental Design Guidelines and the Goose Hollow Design Guidelines, both of which are applicable at this site. For a handful of reasons. Just very quickly, the response both emphasizes Portland themes and enhances, embellishes, and identifies the area. It responds very well to the Goose Hollow guidelines that are specific to improving the stadium area. It is coherent. It responds well to the guidelines request for architectural integrity. The commission felt that this design as proposed is a very strong response to A.E. Doyle's original ideas from 1925 about how a completed arcade might look in this position were it to be designed and built today. It's just a really nice historic continuum of the stadium in this area. Probably most importantly are the guidelines B2, protect the pedestrian, and C10, integrate encroachments. The proposal does a great job of delineating the pedestrian zone. It creates a wider pedestrian zone. It provides weather protection in an area when it's needed. It enhances visibility into and out of the stadium. And it does all of this in what we believe will be a landmark piece of architecture for our city. So thank you very much. Be happy to answer questions.
Thank you.
I have one question for you,
Commissioner
since you
Fish.
took the time to join us. The last time we heard from the Design Commission about an arcade was, I think, along Burnside. And there was a lively discussion about whether it met some of the guidelines. It sounds to me like, from your view, this is really setting the bar pretty high.
So it is. It absolutely is. This is a remarkable piece of architecture. And with respect to the arcade district on East Burnside, that is a gateway into the Central City. And I think it's notable that at East Burnside, we have a gateway into the Central City that is marked by a series of arcades. They are expressed in many different ways. Some of them are very traditional arcades. Some of them are more an interpretation of an arcade. And now at the west end, the west entry into our Central City along Burnside, we also have a new arcade. So it's really a nice way to bracket the Central City.
Thank you.
One final thought. Temporary banners do not come into the Type 3 hearings room.
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate it. Good afternoon.
I'm Robert Butler, 226 Southwest Parkside Drive, Portland, Oregon. I guess she wasn't at the meeting, but I guess she wasn't chair then. So the conclusion of this design people was, why would the neighborhood want this arcade for what they're giving up? What's so special about it? That was the conclusion of the Design Commission hearing. Why? Well, it's because it's to get a $55 million project. You know, whether or not there's right-of-way taking or not, there's going to be a $55 million project there. Trust me, there's the money for it. There's the money in it to do it, and it will happen. Enhanced safety, I'm giving you the 14 reasons why this is less safe. And I'm speaking to you as at the moment for a former licensed professional engineer. This report really sucks. I can't imagine any engineer signing this report as something as factual. So you have the facts in front of you. That's what we're giving up. That curbside loading and unloading for events at the stadium is vital. And of course, the vice president of the Timbers will disagree because he knows more than I do, but I do more than he does in that respect. I've been there 37 years. Trucks, Peter Corvallis trucks, loading and unloading, hood to coast, truck after truckload of materials for that event. We got chairs, tables, all kinds of things, awnings to put up. Curbside loading and unloading is what you need for that, safely. To take that away and put it across the street is unsafe. Same for people that, the charter buses that come in and load and unload. And look at your ADA. You're asking about ADA. Well, you shouldn't even ask the question about ADA, should you? That Providence facility should have provided for it. That ADA parking spot there didn't occur till a number of years later. Providence did nothing for it. They're doing nothing for it now. This project takes away the ADA parking, and it takes away 7 other parking stalls. Then the architect says, trust me, when you walk down this corridor without the trees and the open sky and whatnot, you're going to find it a more pleasant experience. Oh, really? How do you buy that? So the deal is this. You're supposed to get a benefit for a benefit, a benefit for a benefit. The benefit we're going to get is that this is going to trash our neighborhood with the fact that the police cannot get people to stop living on our sidewalk. They're going to live there, and you can't stop them. State of Oregon can't stop them. No one can stop them. So we're going to have a slum there. The benefit for benefit, what do we gain for that extra right-of-way we give them? They won't answer us. I'll tell you what it is. It might be 100 more seats, so you might get 3,700 more seats instead of 3,800. That's the net benefit for a benefit? What a sorry deal. Sorry deal. We're going to trash our neighborhood for that. So, hey, it's great. They're going to build it. You know what? They're going to build it. Trust me. It's a question of whether we're going to trash the neighborhood in the process. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate your testimony. Colleagues, any further discussion?
Could I
Commissioner Fritz?
have staff come back up, please?
Sure.
So when I asked about ADA accessibility earlier, you said it would be addressed during the public works process. Mr. Butler's also reminded me about deliveries. Where else are there areas for both people drop-off and deliveries?
Southwest 20th has on-street parking that can be reserved for those functions. So it's just around the corner. And I think there's some service entries to the back of the stadium on that side as well.
Right, we unload everything. We bring everything in, food, beverage, beer, everything in on the 20th Plaza in our loading zones. And then there's another set of loading zones down along 18th. The area that Mr. Butler is talking about are actually parking stalls. So we don't unload and load trucks generally in those parking stalls. We have bagged them at times. We bag them during games and park police cars there. And then we also put about 100 temporary bike racks there during games. Those bike racks are going to be relocated along the Morrison Street closure that we do every game. So we're not going to lose. We're actually going to add some bike parking in that area. But the operation of the stadium, as far as those parking stalls being loading, unloading, is very rare. Down the street a little bit from there, in front of Providence, there's a truck loading zone right in front of the Providence Clinic. And then, of course, there's our entrance the roadway between us and the Mac Club, which we call Gate 35, but it's just a road, the easement road between ourselves and the Mac Club.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
And so would we then reserve the parking spaces on 20 for people with disabilities?
Well, every parking space is available to someone with disabilities. I don't.
We have, in our
reserve
parking
them.
lot across the street, we have
Okay.
ADA parking.
Okay.
Yes.
And that people can get into at the same cost as on-street parking?
I don't know what your on-street parking rates are during games. I think you've raised the rate, so I'd have to check on that before I can answer accurately.
I think, was it 375, something like that,
I'm not sure.
the stadium rate?
I think that's accurate, but I don't want to speak out of turn.
So what would be the cost of the ones that you have in the lot?
We charge usually generally $15 to $20 a space.
That's more expensive. Okay, something to look at, please.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, right now, there's one ADA parking stall and within a pretty good radius around us. So
Yeah.
Most of the folks get dropped off on the 20th Plaza, and that's where we encourage our fans to come in through there that need that assistance. We usually have a guest attendant meet them. If they need a wheelchair, they take them to their chair, to their seat, or, you know, we have a pretty good program set up for that.
Okay, thank you.
So we're eliminating parking spaces, right?
Excuse me?
We're eliminating some parking spaces?
That we are.
And you mentioned that you sometimes use them for public safety vehicles
We do.
now. Where would those vehicles park?
Well, police can generally park wherever they want, so we'll.
I'm aware of that, but-
We'll figure out where. I mean, we have areas along 18th Avenue that have, we can park, or excuse me, along 20th Avenue that we relocate. We park, at every game, we have EDU bomb dogs at every event. We park them there because there were trees to keep the dogs cool when they stay in their cars, so we'll just have to find another location for them.
And the temporary barriers, what are they?
It's actually, they mischaracterized it a little bit. TriMet, along with us, put up a temporary cattle guards, is what you call them. They hook together their metal racks, and we put them out before game day and try to or direct the traffic towards the crosswalk. We call it the Frogger effect. We're trying to stop people from crossing that street in front of the train. So along with TriMet security and our security, you know, we send folks along with Portland Police that we employ at every game up to that street to kind of control that, stop any of the traffic we need to stop to flush out the fans. So they're just cattle guards, bike racks, that go up into place.
And I appreciate that because people do use that area as almost like a pedestrian plaza
Right.
rather than recognizing it as a actual street. But,
And this will improve the lighting and the flow along that sidewalk. I mean,
Right.
I can't tell you that with the tree wells and the parking meters, you know, you're at 6'4", you know, at a good spot. And now we're talking, we're gonna have 11 clear all the way through there. So I think that will benefit both game days and non-game days, just for folks moving
so
through the
in the
neighborhood.
event of an emergency evacuation, how hard would it be to remove those barriers?
Just push them out of the way.
Okay.
Yeah. They're used quite a bit in a lot of large venues, the Rose Garden, or, excuse me, the Motor Center. So,
All right, thank you.
Very good. Thank you. Colleagues, any further questions, comments? Very good. Please call the roll.
Saltzman,
Aye.
Udaly,
Aye.
Fritz.
Well, it's nice to see somebody in the audience with a PTFC scarf on. And I'm also glad that we're doing this with everything being well thought through. Thank you very much. Aye.
Fish.
Yeah, I appreciate the hearing and about the presentation, your testimony, sir, answers to our question. I actually live in this neighborhood, so this is my neighborhood, and I think this will be a tremendous enhancement. And I think the public benefit side on this one is extremely clear. But I appreciate that PBOT has scrubbed this so that we're doing this the right way. And I agree with what you said earlier, sir, that on game days, that sidewalk is awfully narrow. Although I think without the police cars parked there, you have to find some other way to deter people from jaywalking around there, because there is a deterrent effect of having those parked police cars. But I would think it would be even better to have actually police officers physically stationed at the various places. And by the way, the reason that you enforce those rules is for public safety. You just don't want people dodging cars and MAX trains. So, thank you, and I'm pleased to vote aye.
Wheeler.
Aye. The ordinance is adopted. We are adjourned till 2 p.m. tomorrow. Thank you.
thank you.